The day I became the most hated man in Oakridge Heights was also the day I realized how fragile power really is. If you've ever felt trapped by someone on a petty power trip, you're going to want to hear this entire story because what happened next shocked everyone, including me. We moved to Oakridge Heights for peace, not war. After losing my wife Anna to a sudden illness last year, my 13-year-old son, Ethan, and I needed a change. We wanted a safe community, somewhere he could play outside, and I could try to pick up the pieces of our lives. The neighborhood brochure showed quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and a beautiful Vivica Park with walking trails and a pond. It seemed perfect. The park was more than just pretty scenery to us. It became our sanctuary. On weekends, Ethan and I would take his RC boat to the pond, the same kind Anna had bought him for his last birthday. Watching him laugh as the little boat zoomed across the water felt like a lifeline. For a few hours, we weren't a grieving father and son, we were just a dad and his kid, trying to heal. That all changed the morning she showed up. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" A sharp voice sliced through the air like a knife. Ethan froze, his boat still buzzing across the pond. We turned to see a woman in her late 50s marching toward us. Perfectly styled hair, designer tracksuit, and a clipboard tucked under her arm. She didn't look like she came to enjoy the park, she looked like she came to patrol it. "Good morning," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Just enjoying the pond with my son." I extended my hand. "I'm Jack Coleman. We moved into the Maple Drive house a few weeks ago." She didn't take my hand. Instead, she glared down at my son's toy boat. "This is a direct violation of Oakridge Heights HOA policy. Motorized devices are strictly prohibited in the community park. The fine is $400. My stomach dropped. A fine? For a toy boat? The realtor told us the park was for residents and their families. "We're not hurting anyone." She smirked in a way that made my blood boil. "The regulation was updated last month. All residents were notified by email. Ignorance isn't an excuse." Her tone was dripping with the same condescension I'd heard from every self-important bureaucrat I'd ever dealt with. I checked my phone later. No email, not in my inbox, not in spam. She was lying, or at least forgetting to notify certain people. But in that moment, all I could think about was Ethan staring at me with wide eyes. His face was pale, and I saw tears threatening to spill. "Dad, we weren't doing anything wrong," he whispered. I wrapped my arm around him. "I know, buddy. Let's pack up." The woman's smirk widened. "I'm Margaret Sloan," she said proudly, as if her name should mean something to me. "HOA president. If you check your email more carefully in the future, you won't have any more problems. I'll send the fine notice this afternoon." We left quietly that morning, but my anger burned hotter with every step. What kind of person ruins a grieving kid's only moment of happiness? That night, after Ethan went to bed, I started digging. It didn't take long to learn the truth. Margaret had been HOA president for nearly a decade. Her day job, owner of Sloan Realty, a small luxury property firm. Through online forums and social media posts, I discovered a disturbing pattern. People who crossed her or questioned HOA rules often chose to sell their homes within a year, and somehow, Sloan Realty always had a hand in those sales. The next day, I met George Miller, a retired lawyer who lived 2 houses down. When I mentioned my run-in with Margaret, his friendly smile faded instantly. "She find you, didn't she?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed. "Welcome to Oakridge Heights. Margaret's been running this place like her own fiefdom for years. Most folks just pay the fines to avoid trouble." George leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But if you're interested, I've got files, HOA records, emails, things the board doesn't want residents to see, and I think you'll find them very enlightening." I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a battle that would turn the whole neighborhood upside down. A battle where I'd discover just how far Margaret would go to protect her power and how far I'd go to protect my son. The next morning, George invited me over for coffee. His home was lined with law books, framed certificates, and an old leather briefcase on the kitchen table. He poured a cup and slid a thick folder across to me. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," he said. "Margaret's been abusing her position for years." Inside were HOA meeting minutes, financial statements, and email correspondence that Margaret had conveniently never shared with the rest of the residents. The more I read, the angrier I became. Fines weren't random, they were targeted. Families with lower incomes or those who voiced complaints seemed to rack up violations at 3 times the rate of others. "This is a pattern," George explained, tapping a highlighted section. "Look at the properties that went up for sale over the past 5 years. Many of them were bought by shell companies tied back to Sloan Realty. She pressures homeowners with selective enforcement until they sell cheap. then flips the properties for a profit. It was worse than I thought. Margaret wasn't just an overzealous rule enforcer. She was running a quiet little real estate empire on the backs of terrified homeowners. It made my blood boil. And then George dropped the bombshell that made my mind race with possibilities. "You know the park you and your boy love?" he asked. "The HOA doesn't even own it outright. It's leased from Oakridge Development Company. Lease expires in less than 2 months. Margaret's been trying to get a private deal to buy it through her real estate firm, not on behalf of the HOA. I nearly dropped my coffee. Wait, she wants to own the park personally." George nodded. "Word is she plans to reduce public access and build 2 luxury homes along the pond. She's already changed the rules, like that motorized toy bantu make the place less usable. When she gets the deed, she cash in, and nobody even realizes it." For the first time since moving there, I felt a spark of control. I had spent years in business before Anna got sick. I knew how to recognize a distressed asset when I saw one. If Oakridge Development was looking to offload the park, maybe I could beat Margaret at her own game. Before rushing into anything, I wanted more evidence. George introduced me to a few other residents who'd been burned by Margaret's tactics. We met quietly rotating homes each week, speaking in hushed tones. Maria, a single mum, shared how her kids had been banned from the playground for being too loud. James, an elderly veteran, had been fined for his non-compliant mailbox, even though it had been there since the neighborhood was built. Every story followed the same pattern. A petty rule, a trumped-up violation, escalating harassment, then pressure to sell. By the 3rd meeting, we had a group of nearly a dozen residents, all with similar grievances. The quiet resentment against Margaret was simmering, waiting for the right moment to boil over. That's when I started researching Oakridge Development Company. Through some old business contacts, I found out the company was struggling financially. Their commercial project downtown had fallen through, leaving them desperate for quick cash. The park was valued at about $250,000, but a cash offer could make it very tempting. "Don't rush," George warned me one night after a meeting. "Margaret still has influence. If she catches wind you're trying to buy the park, she'll make your life miserable. We need to let her commit to her plan publicly before you pull the rug out." He was right, so we waited and quietly gathered more information. Margaret's harassment, however, didn't wait. Suddenly, violation notices started appearing on my door. Improper lawn edging, unsanctioned bird feeder, even driveway oil stains. It was absurd. I contested them, but my appeals mysteriously went missing. It wasn't just me. Maria got a citation for seasonal decorations exceeding permitted duration, because she left a small wreath on her door 2 days past some obscure deadline. James was fined for improperly aligned garbage cans. It was clearly targeted intimidation, but instead of scaring us, it drew more neighbors to our group. Then came the worst blow. One evening, Ethan came home from school in tears. "Dad, the kids are saying we don't belong here. Brianna said her mum told her you're ruining property values." Brianna's mother, I later learned, was Margaret's vice president on the HOA board. That was my breaking point. They could target me all they wanted, but going after my son crossed a line. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I called George. "It's time," I said. "I want to buy that park, and I want Margaret to watch her empire crumble." George chuckled. "Now you sound like a man who's ready to fight back. Let's make some calls." The plan we began to draft wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposing Margaret for who she really was. If we pulled it off, she wouldn't just lose the park. She'd lose the stranglehold she had over the entire neighborhood. And I'll admit, just imagining her face when she found out made me sleep better than I had in months. 2 weeks later, all the pieces were in place. Through a quiet network of business contacts, I'd secured a discreet meeting with Oakridge Development's legal counsel. As George predicted, they were desperate for cash. Margaret had made an offer to buy the park, but her financing was shaky and stretched over many months. When I placed an all-cash offer of $280,000 with a promise to close within 10 days, their lawyer's eyebrows shot up. "You can pay in full, no financing contingencies?" he asked. "We've been waiting for someone like you." By the following week, the deed to the 5-acre park was mine, purchased through a small LLC I set up for privacy. Margaret had no idea. To the outside world, she still believed she was the uncontested queen of Oakridge Heights. While I worked behind the scenes, Margaret ramped up her intimidation tactics, random HOA inspections, fines for imagined infractions, and thinly veiled threats in community meetings. At one meeting, she even hinted about certain residents who don't understand our values and are harming our property values. Her glare at me made it clear who she meant. I stayed quiet, let her dig her own hole. The more she publicly tied herself to the park as her project, the better the fallout would be. Finally, Margaret scheduled a special HOA meeting for what she called the future of our community. Flyers went out promising major park upgrades and exclusive resident benefits. Rumor had it she planned to propose a new monthly improvement fee to fund her development plans. George and I smiled when we heard the details. We didn't just have the DD, we had a plan to expose her greed in front of everyone. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Margaret stood at the podium in her usual polished style, flipping through a flashy PowerPoint presentation. We envision a private lounge by the pond, new landscaping, and premium amenities. These improvements will increase property values dramatically, she said, beaming. Not once did she mention that Sloan Realty would personally profit from building 2 luxury houses along the pond's edge, but her allies on the board nodded along, ready to rubber stamp her plan. Then George stood up. Madam President, before you move to a vote, shouldn't we confirm the HOA's legal rights to the park? His calm tone made the room fall silent. Margaret waved dismissively. Of course we have rights to the park. Oakridge Development and I are finalizing the sale as we speak. That was my cue. I stood and walked to the front, pulling a folder from my bag. That's interesting, Margaret, because, as of last week, Oakridge Development no longer owns the park. I do. For a moment, she blinked as if she hadn't heard me correctly. Excuse me? I held up the deed for the entire room to see. This is the recorded property transfer for the Oakridge Heights Park. It now belongs to my LLC, effective immediately. The HOA no longer has any control or access rights. That lease you were counting on, it expired yesterday. Gasps erupted across the room. Margaret's face drained of color, then flushed red. You can't do this. The community has rights. No, I said calmly. The HOA had a lease, which is over. I have every legal right as the new owner, and before anyone panics, no, I'm not building luxury houses or banning kids. My plan is to restore the park as a conservation and recreation space for the entire community. Free access for all residents, children, fishing passes for families, except for HOA board members until they step down. The room erupted in murmurs, many of them surprisingly supportive. Parents nodded, some smirked. People were tired of Margaret's rule and her petty fines. Margaret, on the other hand, was unraveling. You blindsided me. This is unethical, she shrieked. Unethical. George interjected, like secretly planning to build 2 private homes and profit off the community. We've seen the designs. Margaret, you weren't going to improve the park for everyone, you were going to steal it. The murmurs turned into outrage. Several residents stood up and demanded an audit of HOA finances. One board member even announced his resignation on the spot. Margaret stormed out, but her power was broken. Over the next month, more board members resigned. The remaining residents voted in new leadership and pushed for transparency. Margaret tried to rally support, but the recording of her secret plans, leaked by one of our group members, finished her reputation for good. As for the park, Ethan and I kept our promise. With help from a local conservation group, we cleaned up the pond, added benches, and even started a junior ecology club for the neighborhood kids. Watching Ethan teach another boy how to fish one sunny afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt since Anna passed peace. Margaret learned the hard way that when you misuse power, you eventually lose it. And me, I learned that sometimes standing up for what's right takes more than words, it takes action. And that Vivica part, it's not just ours anymore. It belongs to the whole community, just not to the tyrant who thought she owned it.